Thanks, and I was really pleased to hear what you said about the Statistical Commission. It's a shame, in a sense, that in the 1990s we weren't able to persuade that commission to take that role, because there were a couple of attempts on indicators to try and have a much more holistic approach to what needs to be measured, but also then to ensure that where things were not being measured, that support would be given. I kind of wanted to start a little bit by a comment on the previous panel, and a little story about where the major groups process came from, and then I'll move on to it. I had a meeting with Nitin Desai in 1994, who was the Undersecretary General for the Department of Policy Coordination and Sustainable Development, as it was called then, now DESA. He'd been the number 2 to Maurice Strong in Rio, and I was with the Mayor of Manchester for a meeting, and I complimented him on the work on having these 9 chapters on the major groups. And I said, how did you come up with the idea of that? And he said, well, the trade unions, they were so pushy. We thought, give them a chapter. I said, sorry? So the NGOs, they were so angry with us, we thought, give them a chapter. Women, yeah, well, Bella Absor, if any of you have met Bella Absor from the past, large woman, large stick, pretty frightening. I can understand why women got a chapter. So I said, New York cab drivers. He said, well, if they had been there and they'd been arguing, they might have got a chapter. The education community, very nice people, got chapter 38, who were not recognised as a major group. Now, whether that's a real reflection on what happened, I don't know, but it was what he told me on what the reasoning behind the 9 particular major groups or parts of society were. Because it doesn't cover everybody, and I think that point needs to be revisited. And I also think on the post-2015 development goals, I think it's important that, in a sense, we clearly see this as a path to that sustainable planet that Agenda 21 originally had started to map out. And it's my feeling that the aspirational goal is very important, and then sets of targets underneath the aspirational goal. And I was very intrigued by the approach by some countries in the debate in the General Assembly in the autumn, where they were talking at different targets for different levels of development. The kinds of targets for the UK should be different than the targets for Kenya. And therefore it allows a much more creative conversation, I think, in the context of that, and then of course sets of indicators underneath that to support that. And I would suggest we look at the Human Development Index levels of development as perhaps the 4 levels of development one would look at for developing those particular targets. And I think that will be important. I was also intrigued by what David said, and I think that the importance of this new committee that's been set up on sustainable development finance is really, really important. And it should offer a portfolio of what should then become the mechanisms for supporting the delivery of the goals post-2015. And it's important that it's been set up early enough to influence that. But does the public have the money? Well, we managed to find the money for the banks. The banks and financial institutions privatise the gains and socialise the losses. And of the 40 countries in the north that have invested in their banks, something like 12.8% of the national GDP has gone to the banks. So clearly, you can find the money from the public finance. The question is, what are the priorities for that? And it goes back to Peter's comment on political will. If there's a political will to deliver, then there will be money to follow that. And I think that's very, very important. We've come a long way since 1992 with the recognition for the participation of stakeholders in the process. If you tried to get into the negotiations in 1992, the very nice and polite UN guards would explain this as an intergovernmental process and you weren't welcome in the room. So what the 9 chapters of Agenda 21 did, I think, was to recognise that governments alone can't make policy. They need to be informed by stakeholders so that they make better informed decisions when they're doing that. And if Johannesburg was about one thing, it was about recognising that to deliver global agreements at the national or local level, then the involvement of those stakeholders in the delivery of those through partnerships was, I think, one of the most important outcomes from that particular event. And so what came out of Rio+20, I think, is a recognition that it's not just about informing the policy, it's not just about being involved in the delivery, it's also about being part of the information base. And that, you know, stakeholders have a lot of ideas about how we might move forward in a post-Rio+20 process. And that information base needs to be underpinned with the governments and with the UN system. And so if you look again at the UN site for Rio+20, it's actually quite amazing. And the site that's now up for post-Rio+20, because there's a section for major groups material to be. That's a real advancement. But I think for the future, this office should play a role of integrating government, UN, and stakeholder material and information into issue-based portals of information. And clearly this office can play a role in the green economy, but I think it's clear that in water, energy and food, three of the areas that are likely to get sustainable development goals, that they could play an opportunity to bring the information bases of all of the players so that governments can find the information in one place. And there's a good example of where some of that is being done. Kimo, who's here from IISD, the information portal that they produce and they send out on the 2015 process, I think is one of the best examples about how you can find out about what's happening in the UN family, what's happening in governments and what's happening in stakeholders around particular areas, whether it's climate or 2015 or water or other things. And I think, you know, you don't have to reinvent things, you need to support the things that already exist. So I think that's very important. I also think that the debate that was put forward by the German government in the run-up to Rio+20, the nexus between food, energy and water, is critical. We can't work in sectors alone, we need to work across sectors. And I think that this office can play a role in helping to bring together those information bases to help for a more integrated approach to implementation. Because, you know, for food, water represents 70% of agriculture production. You need to be able to look at all of these, and I don't think the original MDGs did that very well. I think we have an information overload, and this is one of my worries, and I think that clearly what we need to do is find mechanisms for ensuring that maybe it's not one shop, but that maybe this office plays a role in helping to find all the information and then direct people very clearly to where other bits of information can be found. I think at the moment it's such a mess out there that unless we start to create some form of portal for information, then I think that that will be a mistake and a missed opportunity. And I think that's true in the sense of collecting information for both all the stakeholders, but also at all the levels. There's information at country level which can be brought into here, which can then inform other countries at different levels of development about what they can use that's available from their other partners. My feeling is that the landscape of information has changed over the last few years, and we need to recognise that and be part of a kind of partnership to deliver a better form of a better infrastructure for finding out about things. I don't think it'd be wrong to maybe end with a quote from Einstein, and he said we can't solve the problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So this offers the challenge to this office. What kind of new thinking do we need to have? What forms of new information bases do we need to make sure that we address the challenges of the next 10 years? Thank you.